Good morning. Thank you for joining us for a live Q&A this morning. The whole idea is we're helping to answer questions, and if you have the answers to people's questions, please chime in and help answer them. So we're just basically going to be having a look around. We were going to be doing a brood inspection today, but we had a few rain showers just now. It's not a great time for bees to have their home pulled apart if it's raining. They really don't like it, so we've decided to skip the brood inspection this week and move straight to just answering your questions. And if you've got answers to other people's questions, please chime in. Trace, have we got any questions coming in?
Oh, Cedar, you are hot off the mark. We do actually. Let me just, this is one that came in through our email from Simon Foster in Bustleton in Western Australia, and Simon's had his hive since the beginning and has not looked back, and he loves his hive. So hi, big shout out to you, Simon. His question to you, Cedar, was something, wanting to know if you could cover something about robbing bees. He's saying at this time of the year the nectar flow with the Mari tree has ended, and he's harvested 2 frames, and then a day later had a swarm of bees trying to get into his hive. They were unsuccessful as his colony fended them off. And just wondering what's a good thing to do about stopping the robbing bees?
Okay, so robbing bees, the first thing is identifying, and as you say, you've identified that there's bees coming to your hive to rob it. Now, you can get a bit confusing though, because sometimes you can get things like a swarm leaving and a swarm returning again. Sometimes they can do a false swarm and so on. And you can usually tell what's going on by the bee numbers. When they swarm, the bee numbers halve or even more. And when they come back, then when you look in the windows, you'd see a lot more bees again. As you can see, this hive is a little bit weak. There's only a few bees up there now. We've had very poor nectar flow, and the numbers of bees have been dropping by the way the queen throttles her egg laying to the nectar flow. I just pulled off the window on the other side. I can see that there's a few more over there. So, and I can see quite a lot down between the frames here. If I look in this rear view, you can see quite a lot of bees there. So I'm not immediately worried about this hive, but it is on the low side. So we do need to do some more brood inspections to make sure this hive's happy and healthy. Getting back to your question, robber bees come in and they, instead of going for the entrance like a returning swarm would, they'll go for every nook and cranny around here trying to find a way into the hive. But they don't necessarily know where the entrance is, so they're looking for any way in. Now, if you see that kind of erratic behaviour trying to get in the back here and around here, then that is robbing. And what you need to do in a robbing situation is give your bees a helping hand by reducing the entrance size. Now, we have entrance reducers, but if you don't have one of those, don't worry. You can just use some straw or something like this and literally push it in the entrance to close it up a bit. Straw can be quite good in this situation, especially if you're not able to come back to the apiary immediately. If you push some straw in the entrance with your hive tool, obviously you've got your bee suit and gloves and whatnot, because you're around the side of the hive where the bees will defend their entrance, and you're pushing the straw in to the front, which they might not like. Now, leave a gap, but only needs to be this wide for a bee to get out, and that'll give the bees maximum capability to defend their entrance, because it's a much less of an area for them to defend. And the straw is quite neat because they will then remove it over time as needed. So it's something that you can do if you've got an apiary at a far and you need to stop some robbing, and then they will fix the problem themselves by taking the straw out again. As said, also our entrance reducer is good. It narrows it to about this wide, and you can put that on and just make it a bit easier for your colony to protect it. Now, if you still notice they're going crazy and there's big fights and tussles at the front and everything, you can get more extreme and actually cover the whole thing in a bed sheet and put it to the ground, and that'll make it hard for the robbers to find the hive, yet your bees in there will be able to find their way out. The main issue with robbing, or what stimulates robbing, is honey being exposed. So make sure you don't have any honey exposed. It's a really bad idea to leave honey out for bees. Now, what happens is they get a taste for collecting honey or robbing honey rather than going to the flowers like they should be. And then what happens is those bees will tend to go and find other hives that might be a weak hive, and what then happens is those weak colonies, if they can't defend themselves, will get robbed out and die out, and that spreads pathogens around. It's all bad. So if you notice robbing, then get on top of it by reducing your entrance as the first point of call.
Thanks, Cedar. That great question too, Simon. And he's just got one little bit extra that he wanted to, just as important to point out to new beekeepers, to not maybe take so much honey out of your hive this time of the year. He's in Australia, and leaving some honey in there for the bees. Is there any sort of set rule for that? How much you should leave?
So what I tend to do is you watch what's going on, and if they're filling and there's more nectar coming in, then you can take some honey. But if you notice that they're actually hungry like they are here, then it's a good idea to leave most of it for the bees. So in this situation here, I wouldn't take any honey. You can see they're a bit hungry. They've actually eaten some of the cells of honey away. And when you get that checker pattern where it's completely full and then completely empty, that's a sign that they're hungry and actually decapping it and eating the honey. It's quite different to the look of when they're filling it, which is the nectar spreading out like this in more of an even shape and filling out towards the edges. So here we don't have a nectar flow right now, not a good time to harvest. Now, if you really wanted to, you could just harvest a little bit, and flow frames do allow you to do that. You can harvest part of a frame or all of one frame or multiple frames. Now, if you're unsure, ask your local beekeepers, get some local knowledge, but also you might just like to take a little bit, leave the rest for the bees. And if you know there's a dearth coming up, which is a time without nectar and flowers, then leave the honey for the bees, and you might even need to feed them to build up some stores to last the time with no flowers. Now here where we are in this subtropical region, we don't really need to feed them. There's always something, but many places in the world it is a good idea to feed the bees some sugar syrup in those times where they might otherwise starve. So in the Northern Hemisphere, it's now spring, and that's a very exciting time. But what can happen in those colder regions is your bees might get really enthusiastic and start flying a lot, start laying the eggs, and then there could be a cold snap again. If you get that cold snap again, then it might be a good idea to feed your bees then, because they can get into the situation where they use their last bit of supplies and then they don't have anything to go through the next cold snap and could die out then. So beekeepers in those regions, I'm not an expert, but if you've got some experience there, you can chime in and help answer questions as well.
Great, Cedar, and on that actually I had a question yesterday come in on the phones, and one of our customers, a woman, was asking if she is feeding the bees, how do you then know when to stop feeding the bees?
So to stop feeding, when you stop feeding the bees is actually when you notice that things change. They're bringing in pollen and nectar, and you can see it building up again, and or you think they've got sufficient stores to last the winter. So beekeepers, if they're feeding before a long cold winter, they'll tend to feed prior to winter, and then just let them do their thing, survive over the winter time, knee deep in snow. And then hopefully at the other end, they've had enough stores and they've been able to last during that time. So in that case, you'd be feeding prior, building up some stores and then stopping. If you're feeding in springtime, as I was just talking about, because you sense that they've started but it's gotten cold again and you want to make sure they're surviving through, then as soon as it gets warm again and the flowers start coming out, you'll stop feeding, because you do not want to get sugar syrup in your honey, or it will be partly sugar syrup, which isn't so good.
Oh, great, Cedar. Don's and Don, you probably won't believe this, but we get asked this question a lot. Do bees come with the flow hive?
They don't. So there's a few main ways to get bees. You can order what's called a nucleus, and that's probably the easiest way to get going, where it's a little going beehive. It's got about half a box full of brood frames, which are just your typical wooden frames, and there's a queen in there, there's pollen stores, there's nectar stores, there's brood. So it's a going little beehive, and all you need to do is, once you've picked it up from your bee breeder, is put it in place where you want your hive, get your bee suit out and your smoker, swap those frames into the bottom box here, don't put the top box on yet, and look after them and they'll grow. The other ways are you can order a package, which is like an artificial swarm, where it's just bees, no comb, and you shake them in and they can start like that. They typically come with a queen in a cage with a block of candy at the end, and that already mated queen will then be released into the hive with that package of bees, and they can start like that. Or in the springtime, if you're near a lot of beehives, you might be lucky enough to find a swarm. We've got plenty of videos showing you how to do all of these things to get started, and also we have the beekeeper.org, which is an in-depth training course made to take you from square one all the way through to having even a deep scientific knowledge, and it's also a great fundraiser. So have a look at that if you really want to learn a lot about bees. It's got experts from all over the world chiming in on that. There is one more way to start, and that's called a bait hive. So occasionally you can be lucky enough to put your box out there and a swarm of bees will move into it. Now, it only usually happens if you've got your hive a few hundred metres from a whole lot of other beehives, and sometimes you can put things like a lemongrass oil or swarm commander or something like that in there to help attract the bees. And I have had success with that, and I've also failed a lot in catching swarms with bait hives in the springtime.
Oh, that would be so great, wouldn't it, to actually get the bait hive to see it work successfully?
Yeah, it is good. Sometimes you're lucky enough to be there and watch them all marching in as well.
Oh, awesome. Cedar, this is Lisa. She's in the northwest USA and getting their bees the middle of April as their season's coming on. They've sealed the hive, got it all ready. Just wondering, is there anything else they need to do to prepare the hive for the incoming nuke that they're about to receive?
Fantastic. So the next thing you need to do is find a location. It's nice to set it up where you're going to want it, so that you don't have to go through moving your hive. Now, you can move hives later, and there's lots of techniques, but it's better to move your, find your position, and then it saves you doing that. This hive's doing better. It's got more bees, it's got some capped honey in there. So we've got some videos called Situating Your Hive, which you need to take into account things like the flight path of they're able to fly out the front without bothering anybody. You don't want it to go right into a walkway or something like that, where bees might get in your visitor's hair and then they get stings and so on. So best to choose a spot away so that the bees can fly up and away without bothering humans or pets. If you've got a dog that's you're concerned about hassling the hive and so on, they usually learn pretty quickly when they get a sting on the nose, but if you don't want that, you can put a little, people often put a picket fence around for pet reasons, but others also just have them like this in their backyard. So there's probably more to think about, but it sounds like you've put it all together and you've got your finish on it, you've chosen your finish, and you're ready to go. So good luck with the next step, and make sure you watch our videos, or if you're nervous about installing your nuke, get a hand from somebody who's done it before, or even if you've got another beginner, sometimes it's useful just to have somebody else there with you to help you through that process.
Great. And whether it be full sun or under shade, or what do the bees prefer?
So bees are quite resilient, they can handle full sun or full shade. However, if I had a choice between full sun or full shade, I'd go full sun, just because pathogens like chalkbrood will tend to flourish in a damper, more shady environment. So full sun is better for that reason, and sometimes you'll find people who end up with chalkbrood in their hive will move it into the sun, and that can make it go away. However, in really hot climates, some shade in the afternoon in summer would be lovely for your bees.
Great. Christina's called in from Perth and just wondering, do they need to clean the tray, and can ants get into the hive?
Okay, so ants can get into the hive. We have these little ant guards, which you can see down here. We're not utilising them right now because the ants aren't too bad. The ants seem to come and go. You might get a wet time and they all come up out of the ground and find cosy homes behind your doors. So we brought out these ant caps to help, and we have retrofits for our Flow Hive 2 as well. This is the Flow Hive 2 Plus with the bigger size leg bolt that's moved out towards the corner, and the solid aluminium leg. But these ant caps, you basically screw that up and you put some oil in the bottom cap here. Our flowers are going wild here with this amazing rainy weather, and it's almost like the flowers are eating the hives rather than the other way around. But it's fantastic to have such rain to set off the paper bark down here in the valley. Hopefully we'll get that going. But that ant guard is made to stop ants getting up that leg or deter them, so you can put some oil in there or grease, and that acts as a barrier. Of course, it won't really work unless you take some of this foliage away from the hive. So if we were trying to get rid of ants now, we'd trim this back all the way around so there was nothing touching the hive. Otherwise the ants will just simply use this as a bridge, get up onto the hive, and well, they don't bother the bees at all, they bother the humans because they lay all their eggs behind these covers, and that just gets annoying. On to your next question, which was the tray. Yes, clean your tray out from time to time, every month or two, because it does have a bit of a build-up that's in there, and it's a good idea to give that a bit of a clean out. And you can use a hose or get your hive tool and scrape it out, and then simply put it back in. Now, if you're using it to catch the hive beetles, then you can refresh that with a little bit of oil in the tray, and it just needs to cover the surface, a bit of any old cooking oil, and that'll catch some of those pesky hive beetles if you have those in your area.
Yes, gosh, I'm looking at it, Cedar, thinking, God, why didn't I bring the secateurs? Need to do a bit of gardening. Whenever we have the hives in the garden, it grows like unbelievable. Yeah. It's like a triffid. It's incredible.
A particularly amazing year for growing things.
It is.
Not so good for people in our area. You may have heard we've had devastating floods here, 40,000 people evacuated, 21 fatalities, lots of people with their homes that they will not be able to move back into. It's a real disaster. So a lot of our team has been out helping the clean-up process and helping rescue people and so on. And you might have to be a little bit patient with us when it comes to answering your questions that come in with emails and so on, because we're a bit thin on the ground with so many people helping the clean-up effort.
Yeah, thanks, Cedar. Tiz is asking, just wondering, can she block the super from the bees during the canola season? She has a 3/4 super on top of a brood box.
Okay, so 3/4 super on top of the brood box, and
yeah.
She's wondering whether to block the super.
Yeah, it says, could I block the super from the bees during the canola season? I have a 3/4 super on top of the brood box.
So it depends. I guess generally beekeepers, if they don't want the bees to use the super, they'll take the super off.
Yeah.
So that's the done thing. I imagine your query is to do with the canola because it goes candied quite quickly, and if honey goes candied in frames, it's hard to get it out, no matter what type of extraction you're doing. Now, what people have found with canola is the way to deal with it with a flow hive is to just harvest early, and that way it doesn't get time to go candied. Now, typically the canola will go candied between taking it off the hive and the processing factory in conventional beekeeping, because the temperature drops. But if it's a warm time of year and your bees are keeping the hive warm, it'll be slower to go candied. However, you might want to get a jump on it and even harvest it while they're still closing the capping on those frames, and that way you're less likely to get into the situation where you've got candied honey that won't actually come out of the hive. Sometimes you can get a partial candy where it'll flow out and it'll be a bit cloudy and it'll leave some sugar crystals in there. Rarely, I haven't seen it, but in some parts of the world you can get it setting like toffee in the frames, which means you probably just have to leave that for the bees to eat, and hopefully next time they'll replace it with nice liquid honey for you to harvest.
Great. Isaac's calling in from Georgia in the USA. Just wondering, when's a good time to start your beehive?
So the best time, I guess, if you're going to pick a time, would be in the springtime. That's when bees naturally build up. That's when there's an abundance of forage for them. So fantastic time there in the northern hemisphere to get going. Having said that, there's many areas of the world that have a really long bee season. We have a long season here, or typically we can harvest all year round in a way. We get some good honey flows during the winter time, so we can start just about any time of year. But as you head into the colder regions with a long winter, then the springtime's the best. You might still be starting in summer, but you're probably not starting in the fall. However, it's always nice to get your equipment, get it prepared, get your coats on it, and get yourself ready for when the flowers are going to come.
Great. Michelle's saying she's had a bit of trouble with leaking from her flow frames when she's harvesting them, where she's actually now taking the frames out and harvesting them over a tub, saying she's losing about 500 grams a frame. Is there any advice or maybe tips on what's going on there?
Okay, there could be a few things going on. I'll cover the basics, even though you're probably across it. So the first bit is make sure you're harvesting your hive and there's the correct slope on it. So if you have a look at the level, it's down here. You can see that this actually isn't the right slope, even though it was when we set the hive up. So the front needs lifting, the front legs have sunken a bit into the garden. So you want that level bubble in the middle, and that's really important because you need that 3-degree backward slope for the honey to drain away. The next one is there is a problem that crops up from when you close your flow frames. You need to make sure all the parts are getting pushed down. So in here, you've taken this off and you've put your flow key in, and you need to make sure you put it in the top and turn it and leave it for a minute or so, so that all of that wax and propolis can move and all of those cell parts can go down. What happens if they don't quite go down properly is you get a bit of build-up which can restrict the flow next time, or even make it so it doesn't open at all, and then you can get quite a bit of spills happening from that. The remedy to fix that is to leave, and you can almost tell by putting your key in and turning it to see how much resistance there is. If it's quite resistant to you doing the close, then those parts aren't really bedding down properly. So there's a few ways to deal with that. One is you take the frame out and you brush off all the bees, you leave a key in the top there, put it in a black plastic bag in the sun, and let all of those parts just push down. That works quite well, and it'll push back into the correct position as it heats up in the sun. Another one I've heard of people doing is they get a butter knife and just slice, they'll just pull the frame directly out and just slice down between the moving parts, particularly at the bottom, and that can be sort of a quick way to loosen them up and get them pushed down into position again. So have a look at that. You'll see if that is a problem you're getting, by the cell shape, it'll sit just a little bit up like that. So look right down the bottom of the comb and make sure it's forming a proper hexagon at the bottom. Otherwise, it's depending on the way the bees cap it, the viscosity of the honey, you could get a lower, more liquid honey up top compared to down low, so it's slow to move down low and you get some spills. So if you're having trouble with that, it might just be easier to just harvest a couple of frames at a time. So if you do get any spills, it's not a big deal for the bees to deal with. However, if you're getting a lot of spills, then as said, there might be a few things to look at to help with your setup. Now, if you've got any more questions, feel free to contact us and we can help you dive deeper into it and see if there's any further things that we can do.
Great, and there's some good tips coming in too from other people who are tuning in, so that's always good
fantastic.
to hear as well. Cedar, you talked before about feeding the bees. With the flow hive, where would you put the feeder?
So with the flow hive, you can just feed under the roof. There's a few methods. You can take the top cap out and the bees can then have access to that roof area. I've got a video somewhere saying how to make a quick and dirty feeder, and it's basically you can get a Ziploc bag, fill it full of sugar syrup, poke a few pinholes in it and put it up there in the roof, take the plug out and the bees can then access that feed. You can also put a jar upside down with holes in it, an airlock is created and the bees will suck the honey as they need it out of the pinholes you put. I would recommend going for a bigger jar, but to do that you'll need to put a spare box, if you've got a spare brood box, around that jar and then the lid on top of that in order to house that. Or there's other feeders you can buy to put on hives as well. So that's how you do your feeding. Some people do open feeding where they just feed sugar syrup just in a drum with some hay on top of it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that method due to getting the bees in a bit of a frenzy, and also there could be issues with pathogens with open feeders as well.
And Cedar, is it better to use the sugar syrup, or if you've just got one hive, can you feed their own honey back to them?
If you have collected honey from them, you can by all means feed their own honey back to them, but make sure you're not feeding it to a different hive, so well done there. Some people will freeze a frame or two if they've got spare frames and keep them for a rainy day and put them back into the hive and give them some more food like that. So yeah, you can certainly feed them their own honey back.
That's great. Cedar, this is, where is he? Port Stephens. Denise in Port Stephens, New South Wales, just got the flow hive. Just not sure, is autumn a good time to set up the hive?
So Port Stephens, it's going to be a little bit cool down there. If you are going to set up and start in autumn, then you're best off starting with a going colony that's already robust and has even some stores. So it might be a good idea to find a beekeeper who's got a whole going hive that could be transferred into your hive. Because what you need is a bigger colony to go and get some more stores and collect some more flowers in the autumn. Having said that, check with your local beekeepers. Perhaps there's a great flow coming up and you could start with a smaller colony as well.
Great. Barbara's asking, wants to take the super off for winter. Is it better to shake the bees off into the brood or onto the ground? And do they need to put the super into a plastic bag over winter?
Okay, so you're best off shaking the bees all back into the box if you can, or sometimes you can just shake any bees at the front of the hive and they'll crawl up. Nice to lean something up to make it easier for them to crawl back into the hive. As to getting them off the frames, just take each frame out one by one is usually the easiest way, and then brush with a bee brush or some foliage like this, and just brush those bees off back into the hive, or in front of the hive. Then, as said, you want to store those frames. Now, the very best way to store them is in a freezer. That stops anything going manky or mouldy or any vermin getting to them. But if you haven't got that, then if the frames are dry, you can just store them. As said, you might want to put them in a tub or put them in a bag to keep things like wax moth making a bit of a mess of them. But if they do have nectar in them or honey, then you might want to harvest that, wait a few days for the bees to lick it all up and clean it all out. Like you see this frame here, it's nice that we've harvested that and they've cleaned it all back up, whistle clean, and that would be a perfect time to store that frame for a winter, because if they're left with honey in there, then it's likely to get mould and things happening over that winter time unless you're in a freezer.
Great, and maybe coming in on that question is James saying that his flow frames are quite dirty and he can't even tell if they're full or empty. Okay. How would he clean them?
Okay, we've tried all sorts of things to clean them, all sorts of solvents and things. Surprisingly, the propolis and wax is very hard to get off. But one way you can do it is with a hot water pressure washer. So we are coming up to that point where people have had their frames for 5 years and things like that, and they're starting to get, or 7 years. Time goes quick, we're 7 years in now. The frames, when this view gets so covered in propolis and brown and stuff, it does get hard to see and you lose this beautiful, useful view. So we have experimented with taking this plate off and cleaning it and putting it back on. You can do that, but it's quite tricky to do, even though it's possible. We've got videos to show you how to remove those wires and then put it back on again. So that's one option. But the other one is you get a hot water pressure washer. Now, they're expensive if you want a hot water one, but you can just feed a normal cheap pressure washer you buy at the hardware store with hot water. You want to be above wax melt temperature at 63 degrees. Be careful not to burn yourself. So you can get that from a lot of hot water systems if they don't have before the tempering valve, or you can just simply feed it from an urn or a tub that you've put hot water in. And you prime your hose to make sure it's full of water first, and you put one end in there, and that pressure washer will actually suck the water out of the tub. A lot of detail there, but what that gives you is a nice hot spray, and put your frames in the open position, and then you can blast down the lines and give them a good clean like that. Dry them out, and you can put them back in again.
Fantastic. Cedar, Pauline's just come back in. There's obviously a lot of robbing and feeding questions, especially coming in from people here in Australia. Just wanting to clarify, when you were talking about that, does it mean that if your super has been harvested and flowers are now scarce, will the brood box not be sufficient enough for bees over winter?
That's a good question for your local beekeepers as to how much honey you will need for your bees to survive the winter, and ask a few beekeepers, because you'll get differing opinions. I've been in Tasmania, our southernmost state here, and one commercial beekeeper has said you need a 10-frame box and you need 2 boxes full of honey or they will not survive the winter. And I go around the corner and another commercial beekeeper says, oh no, a setup like this is fine. If you've just got a 8-frame laying like this with a box of honey on top, they'll survive the winter. So you will get varying opinions, but the bottom line is they need to have enough stores to survive, and obviously with a smaller colony they won't need as much, so that needs to be taken into account as well. So you can nurse quite a small hive through the winter if they have some stores on the edges of their brood box too. I'm no expert in overwintering, because we don't really get a winter here as far as the bees are concerned, and chime in if you've got some good answers for those colder regions.
That's so funny you said that, Cedar. I spoke to one of our flow customers yesterday and she'd asked 4 people the same, on the same topic, and she got 4. So then she rang and I probably told her something else as well. So
It's the old ask 2 beekeepers get 3 answers thing.
Totally. Stephen's from Brisbane and just wants to talk about Chalkbrood and got any tips to get or control Chalkbrood in the flow hive.
Okay, so first of all, grab your hive, move it into the sun if it's not already. The next thing to do is get your colony back to being strong. A strong colony can usually deal with chalkbrood, kick it all out, and it's fine. Next thing to do would be get rid of some of the old comb in here because it's storing a pathogen load. So cycle some of the frame out. If you're using naturally drawn comb, then you can cut the comb right out there in the field, put the frame back in, and you can dispose of that comb. So don't leave it out for bees. So there's a few options there. Requeening is another thing people do for chalkbrood because genetics are a big part in it. A hygienic hive will clean it out really quickly, and a non-hygienic hive won't, and it will leave in there to spread. So there's another thing that some beekeepers swear by and other people say is hocus pocus, and that's banana skins. So I actually haven't got around to trying it, but some beekeepers swear you chop up bananas just in lines or get the skins, chuck it on top of the brood frames, and it's like putting a stink bomb in the house, or it's like a dog walked in and did its do on your carpet. Not only are the bees going to get rid of that, but they're going to do a spring clean because you just have to, right? And that's the theory behind it, that it's such a stinky kind of pheromone that mimics one of theirs, that they go and do a spring clean and rip out all the chalkbrood. So let me know if you try that and it works for you, and we can do some myth busting as a collective community.
Great. So Johan's asking, do you recommend coating the inside of the boxes with beeswax?
I just leave the natural wood for the bees. However, people do all sorts of things, and commercial beekeepers usually dip their boxes in the typical chemicals they use for preserving fences. So all sorts of really strong chemicals, and then they coat it with multiple coats of the cheapest house paint they can get hold of, inside and out, and that'll make a box like this, last 20 years or so, which is great. But I prefer to leave it just natural for the bees, not to have those chemicals in it. But it's a personal thing. I'm just saying this because you probably can't go wrong. Your bees are quite resilient. But yeah, I choose to just keep it natural wood on the inside, although wax sounds good too. You could coat it with wax if you want to. We have done some hot wax dipping. The results weren't fantastic. I don't bother to do that. With the cedar, it's quite a resilient wood and will last a long time anyway. So just some coat on the outside with a decking product is good. You can see this is a decking product. It has a longer lasting finish. It's made for keeping wood good outdoors, and so that's the kind of choice I would do for the outside of a hive. This one here is an oil. Now oils we tend to steer away from these days because they dry out, and they also can attract the mildew more so.
Great. Cedar, do you, Claire's in Perth and they're still in the mid to high 20s. Do you think it's too late in the season to let a hive raise their own queen?
No, you'll do fine letting a hive raise their own queen at this time of year, I suspect, but again, local knowledge is good. I've been down helping a beekeeper who the hives got flooded down here, and it was a mess to clean up. There's 40 hives that went underwater. Some of the colonies survived, but all except for one lost their queen. So the surviving colonies are busy raising multiple queens, so they will happily raise queens when they need to. Now we're only at the start of our autumn, so I dare say in your locale you're going to have a nice autumn flow as well.
Great. Chuck's just wondering, saying a lot of the beekeepers that they know reverse their brood boxes this time of the year, basically trading the bottom box for the upper box. Do you recommend that?
Ah, interesting. Well, with a flow hive, you wouldn't do that. Although you could. I have experimented with putting the flow frames down the bottom, but that's for a different reason. That's just for easier access to your brood frames. They seem to be more enthusiastic to fill the honey up the top though, so we tend to continue with this, but do muck around with that if you want to. Now, in terms of cycling your frames, the reason why they're doing that is to cycle some frames out. So you're putting more fresh, newer ones down the bottom, and the older ones that have been used for brood a lot up the top, and then you can centrifuge them out in the conventional way, and that's one way to cycle brood frames out and make sure that your bees are getting at least a few new brood frames each year to keep their brood nest happy and healthy. The way I would recommend with a flow hive is simply move some of the frames out to the edge over time. So you've got old dark ones in the middle that have been multiple cycles of brood, the silk's built up, the cells are getting smaller, very dark in colour, time to start moving them towards the edge. You put them out there, you wait for the brood to emerge, and all you need to do is simply take that frame out. If it's a naturally drawn comb, you just cut it out right then and there onto a tray, take that away, enjoy the comb, put the frame back into the centre, and the bees will redraw from that. So that's a good way to go. The other way, which is even easier, is you just take splits in the springtime, so half end up being replaced anyway, and it's a great thing to do for swarm prevention. So that's my favourite method. You just keep taking splits, and that keeps freshening up half of your brood frames down the bottom here.
Oh, great. And following on from that, James, who's in Pennsylvania, has got the fly hive too, and asking a similar kind of question, but if he's adding a second brood box, would it be all right to bring up a couple of full brood frames from the bottom box and then pop them into his top brood box?
Look, some people do that, but I don't really recommend it because for starters, this window doesn't really seal. You take this off and you've got bees just there and the frame's just there. So that bit's not so good. But also I haven't really found it changes much. The bees will start using this when they need the space, and they will put your super on when they're really bursting with bees down here, and when a good healthy colony, numbers of bees, coincides with a great nectar flow, then they'll start using the flow frames and storing honey there. If you want to hurry things up a little bit, the method I would choose would be just to scrape some of the burr comb off the top of the frames. If it is getting ready for super, they will typically be building some comb right on top of your wooden frames. Scrape some of that off, and just with your hive tool, mash it into the flow frame surface, and then obviously with the frame out, and you might want to put that back in the window, and you can just watch the bees get up there and recycle that wax and start using it on the flow frame right away, which might not hurry up things in general, but it'll keep you entertained for some time and you'll get to watch the bees doing their thing and coating the cells in wax and joining all the parts together. Raining here now, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for all of your great questions. Let us know what you'd like us to cover next week. Best of luck in the Northern Hemisphere with the season to come. Exciting time, the springtime. And if you're here in the Southern Hemisphere, just be mindful that it's a very wet time on the east coast of Australia here. Make sure you're trapping those hive beetles, especially if your colonies are weak. And what you want to avoid is those pesky little hive beetles taking over your hive. So thank you very much for tuning in, and same time next week.